Good afternoon. It's really good to be on stage with an amazing audience, and it's been a great dialogue so far this morning. We're going to spend the next 25 minutes talking about the impact of exponential technologies and intelligent technologies on this construct we call work and jobs. But before we get into it, I want to just pause here for a second and highlight a couple of things. And Bruce said something very important. Everyone's talking about what the future holds with regards to AI, etc. The stuff I'm going to share with you comes from the insights of the work we do with organizations, large organizations like yours in the room, where we help them develop new generation propositions, new profit models, customer models, business models to create businesses that generate future relevance and growth for those organizations. It's either that or we help them modernize so they can compete in the current environment. In order to increase the probability of success, we have to work with as much observable data as possible. We apply some really good repeatable and structured logic to that, and we get a view of potentially where the technology is going to go in the short to medium term. And that's about it. I think anyone that's trying to predict the future is, in my opinion, perhaps naive and a bit arrogant, so narrogant, if that's a word. All right, things are just changing too quickly. At a pace that we do not comprehend. So as we go through this, it's less about getting caught up in a stat and more about developing a mental model through which you look at how things are changing. So the mental model of commercial application, utility, feasibility inside your organization. And if you develop the right mental models, then it's easier to navigate the changes that we're seeing in the market. This matters because we are exposed to some amazing technologies already. This is not the future, this is now. These technologies are fundamentally changing how we will live, work, and communicate, and it will make life better. It already is. The interesting thing is the same interesting and really smart technologies sometimes get used for purposeless things, like a self-solving Rubik's Cube or a self-licking ice cream. And it speaks about the snake oil that Bruce mentioned earlier. A lot of vendors are selling interesting technology with very little application that matters inside the business. I'm going to contradict myself a bit because sometimes when we look at something, and this is, by the way, this is not AI generated, this is real. This is humanoid robots from China, recently participated in the world's first humanoid boxing match. And I think there was a humanoid marathon as well. When you look at this, with a reasonable amount of just common sense, I can see this in my home in a couple of years, in a hospital, in a manufacturing environment. It's quite conceivable, right? And if we embrace the fact that technology is doubling in capability and halving in price every 18 months, it's soon, that practicality and feasibility is certainly going to be there. So we've been having these conversations for a very long time, but why is AI such a big thing at the moment? And it really comes down to the fact that artificial intelligence is a general purpose technology. Now, when you see GPT, it's not the same GPT in front of chat, by the way. It's a different GPT. So general purpose technology is something like electricity, right? It's transformative technology. It's broadly applicable. It's deployable across a variety of sectors. It's got expansion and extension potential. It changes the economy of a sector, of the businesses that are in it. Of society, it influences productivity. So this is why we're paying attention, and without a doubt, over the last couple of months, we've seen that anything related to AI has also become geopolitical. All right, there's certainly an arms race with regards to that. As a result of it, there's a tremendous amount of hype, and you either carry a Terminator mindset, a mindset of mutual destruction, or you carry a Star Trek mindset, one of mutual prosperity. And quite interesting, a few years ago, I had the opportunity to meet and spend time with a couple of NASA astronauts. And as soon as we sat down for a nice informal dinner, I asked them, so what does the future look like? And they said, it's all been figured out. Just watch Star Trek. That's the future. That was the answer to me from a bunch of scientists and astronauts. But anyway, so you've got this is the spectrum you operate at. You've got people that are really worried about our existence. We're deeply concerned. On the other side, there are people that are really gullible about perhaps what this technology can do. Those two extremes don't help the debate. As you move it closer to some kind of balance, we've got organizations that are pessimistic about this technology. I'm concerned for them because if your competitors are moving ahead and you're not, you're going to lose competitiveness. That is the reality. There's a bit of game theory involved, yeah? But on the other side as well, if you've got this hopeful inclination that AI is going to solve every single problem inside your organization, I'm even more worried. In actual fact, the thing that concerns me the most is when I'm in an executive meeting and the question gets raised, how do we bring AI into our business? We've got to figure out a way. I can almost guarantee you the chances of not achieving a return on investment are very, very high. Okay, it doesn't mean we shouldn't use it. I think we've got to apply common sense, look for that utility, commercial application in order to find value. So I think this is where we need to exist. We've got to embrace a possibilist mindset, but we've got to question everything. We've got to look for evidence and make some really good choices. When we try and understand the potential application of AI inside an organization to create that future value, obviously we've got to ignore the hype. The hype doesn't help anyone. So we look for leading indicators that, is this technology something we need to be paying attention to? And just moving from top left across the screen is the adoption rates by US consumers of hardware that enables AI. So we're seeing a higher adoption rate compared to cell phones, smartphones, feature phones, laptops, computers, etc. So adoption rate's very high. Global adoption of AI tools, 5 times quicker than the internet in the US. Now you could argue the fact that we have the internet makes AI adoption easier, but it's happening at a significant rate. Bottom left, the number of people that are investing their careers in AI projects, developers moving to the world of AI, is increasing at a phenomenal rate. And that's a really good leading indicator that the technology has got merit, growing 5-fold in the Google ecosystem. And then the bottom right is the monetization rate of AI platforms. The fastest company to monetize to $10 billion was TikTok, a social media platform. OpenAI achieved that in half the time. Right, so it says we definitely have to be paying attention, but question everything. I think that certainly matters. When we look at its potential to match humans, let me guide you through this graph. The y-axis is human potential, with 0 being equivalent to that of a human. The x-axis is time. So it takes 25 years for the technology to evolve to recognize speech and handwriting. In my case, a few extra years to recognize my handwriting. But then it takes 5 years to understand speech and to start developing predictive reasoning. So I mentioned Moore's law at the beginning of the conversation. AI is actually progressing at a much faster rate than Moore's law, probably doubling every 6 months. In actual fact, I'm going through a bit of research at the moment that says that the progression of AI is actually quite linear at the moment, because compute power and data to train AI tools is actually limiting the progress of the development of the technology. So it's almost, even though it's progressing exponentially, because of other limitations in the ecosystem, we see it as slight linear progression. There's also something that's worthwhile mentioning, again, to create that balance and that understanding, is we talk about AI as a very broad thing, but actually we're living in a world of artificial narrow intelligence. All right, and this is where AI is really constrained. It's good at repeating tasks, etc., but it doesn't match the capability of a human. The frightening stories we're hearing about is that part in the middle and on the right, that general intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and then like the super intelligence, which is on the far right of the screen, is when AI becomes more intelligent than humans and actually doesn't need the human in order to figure out things and make decisions and progress and make judgments, etc. So if I take this from the right of the screen to the left, super intelligence is still theoretical. There's no time frame as to when that will actually be available to us. General intelligence, the interesting thing is if you talk to investors, they'll say it'll be available next year. In actual fact, it was initially 2029, the likes of Elon Musk, etc. We now have some ex-Google technologists saying next year we'll see general intelligence. But the academics say that we're about 30 years away from achieving a real artificial general intelligence. So again, not saying the one is right or wrong, but perspective matters when we make tough decisions in this environment. When we often talk about these technologies in the construct of disruption, right? But it's not the technology that disrupts. Because the technology doesn't progress inevitably. If it progresses because we're investing into it. It progresses because people are building careers around it. And it progresses because you as the consumer insist on it. Once you've experienced the product, you don't want to go back to the old way of doing things. You want the product that thinks for you, makes decisions for you, makes life easier for you. So it's quite funny that the people that are worried about their jobs are the same people that are insisting on products that are enabled by technology, exponential technologies. So investment, we need people to do development, and then you need consumption. If you stop one, the progress of technology stops. What makes technologies very disruptive are the underlying economic models that they enable. So for the last decade or so, we've been going through what we call a digital era. And what made digital very disruptive is that the marginal cost of distribution trended to zero. So if I was a digital business, I could compete and expand far quicker than a business that had been established with bricks and mortars. I can go across borders. I can service more customers, but my marginal cost remains close to zero. Blockchain, it hasn't gone away. It just doesn't have the same amount of hype. Reduces the marginal cost of corporate costs down to zero. So I can run a financial services organization, a telco, with far more complexity on the blockchain at a much cheaper price point. Artificial intelligence trends the cost of creation to zero. And then if you combine that with robots, the cost of production trends to zero. And this is the thing that makes the technology very disruptive. If your competitors start leveraging AI to reduce their cost of creation or their cost of running the business or their cost of production, and you do not, you start losing competitive ground to your competitors. So it creates this game theory type thing. You tend to move because your competitors have, etc. Not the right strategy, but that's what happens. So because of these conversations tend to come up a lot, I developed this equation, and it's quite, so there are a bunch of mathematicians and actuaries in the room, I imagine. So there is a mistake in the equation, so don't call it out. And I only want to focus on the right side of the equation. Right, so this equation was put together. I was on my way to go meet a CEO. I was very frustrated. They'd spent a lot of money on trying to modernize their business, and all their projects were implemented on time and on budget, but didn't achieve a return on investment. And he was in trouble with the board. The people under him were in trouble because they had essentially not achieved value. And so I wrote this equation on a plane to explain to him very simply how he needs to think about making investments. And I want you to focus on the right side of the equation. And what it basically says is, irrespective of the technology you're playing with or looking at, or how complex it is or how expensive it is, as a for-profit business, you're deploying it for one of three reasons, one or more of three reasons. And those are the exponential dividends on the right side. Growth, exponential G. Right? So G is exponential growth, the P, exponential productivity, and the X, exponential experience. In other words, I'm investing into this technology to enable my organization to innovate so I can create more value. I invest into the technology to improve productivity, reduce the cost of doing business, improve quality, efficiencies, etc. And by the way, the P dividend is a favorite South African dividend. All companies that are looking at this are trying to reduce the cost of doing business because, very simply, if you're the lowest cost producer in your sector, golden rule of strategy, all things being equal, you'll always be the winner because your competitors should go out of business before you do. And then X matters for organizations where products have become really commoditized, experience, where it's very difficult to distinguish your product from your competitor's product. So the last line of differentiation is experience. So I invest into the technology to uplift experience. So simple test, you've got to look for growth, productivity, or experience. And if you can't find one of those dividends, don't invest. It's as simple as that. Typically, after we finish talking about this discussion, or this equation, the question comes up. So if I choose the productivity dividend, does it mean that we're going to cause job losses? Because when we think about productivity, we think about cutting heads, reducing the need for people, etc. And this drives the fear often associated with technology and a general purpose technology like artificial intelligence. So here's the thing. Technology has been the biggest job creator over the last 80 years. And it's the largest job creator because it unlocks productivity inside organizations and economies. Recent research coming out of Stanford by an interesting economist that I follow quite closely, Enrico Moretti, says that when industries and societies and economies, etc., that have invested into technology have noted the following pattern. Every time a job is lost as a result of technology, an additional 1.6 jobs are lost because of that secondary effect of the job loss. However, if we are successful in creating a new technology job, we tend to create an additional 5 to 6 jobs as a secondary effect. Right, so this is now looking back retrospectively. This is the observable data around job creation that technology has enabled. If we take a look at current performance using, looking at the impact of artificial intelligence on jobs, an interesting research was done between OpenAI and Harvard, and what they did is they interrogated a database called ONET database in the US. It catalogs 1,000 jobs, and for each of those jobs, it catalogs the tasks that are necessary to fulfill that job and the subtasks required to fulfill that job. So, for example, a radiologist has 3 dozen tasks that they need to fulfill in order to be effective as a radiologist. They then took the engineers at OpenAI and overlaid the technology's capability in terms of replacing those tasks. And the result was that 80% of the workers that they analyzed had 10% of their tasks exposed, and I want to emphasize exposed, to artificial intelligence. 20% of the workers had more than 50% of their tasks exposed to AI. That study was done with Anthropic independently, and they got a very, very similar response. And the conclusion was that currently, where we stand with AI's capability is that we still don't see evidence that the technology will replace the human. In actual fact, what the technology does, it displaces tasks and augments the human. So the way to think about this is that if we blend the human and the technology, what we do, the goal should be to do more, better, as opposed to less, cheaper, which is the narrative we get ourselves caught in. Interestingly, in a separate study, they ranked the jobs that were most exposed to AI. So it's typically jobs of people that are in this room, smart individuals doing complex work, sitting at a laptop most of the day, etc. That's what they called rank 5. It's the yellow line right at the bottom of the graph. Those are the jobs most exposed. It's called Morovich's paradox. It's easier for AI to replace the jobs of highly functioning jobs as opposed to simple motor sensory type jobs like picking a strawberry. However, what they found is that the jobs that had the highest exposure to AI were also the jobs with the highest earnings and the jobs with the lowest unemployment rates. There's been no evidence that the technology is eliminating jobs, specifically those that have got the highest exposure to it. In actual fact, it's been used as an augmentation to make the job more effective. It augments and elevates the role of the human in the ecosystem. So that's the yellow line. The ranks, the orange rank 1 is the category of jobs with least exposure to AI, interestingly enough. The World Economic Forum did a different type of experiment or research, and they essentially went and surveyed a few thousand executives across the world, and basically what they concluded is that you've got to see this playing out within a couple of pies, right? So the problem that we have when we talk about work and jobs is that we tend to talk about job loss or job gains at the extreme. So this specific job is going to be lost, and it will be lost forever, and that's probably true. And then the counter to that is, but we're going to create a new job that we don't even know about, and that is also true. And if we try those conversations, it doesn't work. The thing is, your views on the future of work depends on the industry that you're in, the role that you fulfill, where you are in your career, etc. And those views are probably right. What we need to do is bring them together to create a consolidated, a complex, multidimensional view. And so what we have over here is that the research shows, or the survey-based research shows that we probably are going to lose about 92 million jobs as a result of new technology. But these are the jobs that have got negative attributes: safety concerns, reliability concerns, efficiency concerns, etc. It's like, we want to eliminate bend-over work on farms. People do it, yes, because it's laborers do it because that's the only work they can do, but it's not good for them. The lasting effects are quite negative. The technology has a reinstatement effect. So we lose 92 jobs, but we create 172 million jobs. So as a ratio of for every job we lose, we create 1.7 jobs as a result of technology. And then we've got the augmentation effect, which is where we use the technology to strengthen current jobs. And what we're seeing is that about 50% of the jobs that are currently in the market would have to be upskilled. So it's not a case that they're just safe. We've got to invest into upskilling those jobs. The interesting thing that the opinion that we have in this regard is that when you have a look at the augmentation effect and the reinstatement effect, it raises a viewpoint that says perhaps the future is not about job losses, but changing what a job is, the definition of a job. And so we typically, a job people aspire to is a job for a corporate. And you become part of the corporate, you get the access card, you get all the benefits, etc. But what happens if augmented jobs and reinstated jobs start operating off platforms? So instead of working for one organization, you work for a couple. And maybe the duration that you work for that organization is a couple of months. And the organization has got to find different ways to access your skills for a moment in time to solve a problem, then release you. And then you go to another organization, etc. You could work in the country that your organization's in. You could work across the world, etc. And perhaps this is the conversation we need to be having, is what does the new job look like? Is the corporate job under threat as opposed to jobs? Now, this is not a negative thing. We're creating more jobs overall, but it's the definition of the job, I think, that matters. The question then came up last night in a conversation, but are we at a disadvantage as South Africans because we're a developing economy and this is for the developed world, etc.? Interesting research shows that the heaviest use of AI tools around the world are developing countries. And South Africa is 8th in that ranking. Right? So we're very curious. We've got high levels of trust and high levels of acceptance when it comes to AI. We also perceive that we can figure this out with very little training, right? Which is quite interesting, right? That's probably very much a South African thing. But what it does say is we've got to take this training into account and take advantage of it. I want to move rapidly onto the training thing. When we talk about training, we think about training our staff members. But one of the gaps that we have is fluency rates of executive teams, leadership. Right? So there's a couple of data points. Your knowledge, everyone's knowledge in this room is decaying at a rate of about 30% a year, 30 to 50% a year. That means anything in your CV older than 3 or 4 years is not valuable in helping you contribute to your next job. Right? What we're also seeing is a demand for hybrid skills. I'm an accountant that understands automation, an engineer that understands AI, an architect that understands IoT. That certainly is something that is in demand. And then while we tend to focus on STEM skills, we've got to focus on the human skills as well. Resilience, engaging, storytelling. These are critical skills that matter as well, that we tend to forget about in this construct of fluency. This graph on the screen, you don't have to follow the detail, but I think the pattern is y-axis shows the jobs that we believe are going to be in high demand. The x-axis shows the rate at which those jobs need to be reskilled. And what you'll find is obviously the skills that are in high demand are precisely the same skills that decay at the quickest rate and require regular skilling. Similarly, what we see on this graph over here, this is recent information that's just been released, is what employers believe is going to be important inside their organization over the next couple of years. And the x-axis is where staff are investing to develop their skills. And it's interesting what comes up. Things like creative thinking, resilience, flexibility, leadership, social influence are skills that people think they need to develop and that organizations are looking for inside the organization. It's the most difficult thing to train, right? So we've got to move away from just STEM and embrace STEMpathy. When it comes to executive fluency, organizations where the executive and the board have high levels of fluency, and high levels of fluency would suggest I understand the utility and the commercial application of a technology, I understand how it's going to progress, I understand the impact on my workforce, etc., tend to perform better on a bunch of financial metrics. When the survey was taken across a couple of countries, a few thousand executives, what came out was that the CEO's fluency rate was incredibly low. On average, CEOs scored 23% fluency. The person that has to approve the strategy for the organization doesn't necessarily understand the landscape they are navigating in. The person responsible for signing off on that investment understood it even less. The person responsible to bring skills into your organization doesn't know what skills are necessary for the future of that organization. And the people marketing your product don't really know how to market this. So when we talk about fluency, we've got to shift it down from senior levels only, from the junior levels only, and push it up to the senior levels of our organization. Then I'm going to wrap up on this point over here. The thing that also comes up in conversations about work and job is this thing of generational theory. Now, generational theory is amazing because it helps us understand the different behaviors and attitudes, etc., that we have to deal with our customers and our workforce, etc. However, I think it only works in developed economies, in my opinion, or where the economy is homogenous. Everyone's sort of born into similar conditions. In South Africa, I'm of the opinion that generational theory doesn't work as well. Because a kid born today in Sandton is born into the richest square mile in the country, and just 5 kilometers down the road, a kid born in the same minute is born into incredibly poor conditions. Surely the attitudes and the exposure is different. So I think we live in a world where we'll have people of the same age demonstrating traits of different generations. So our customers, it's complicated to serve customers like that. It's also complicated to employ people like that. So we've got to be careful not to, stereotype people in the various age categories. Some interesting things about this. We know millennials, we talk about millennials all the time. Largest work cohort in the world, and we try to plan our work environment around this. But the fastest work cohort, or the fastest growing work cohort, are the over 65s. Don't want to stop working. We're living longer, quality of life's better. Perhaps we don't have the retirement to stop working, etc. And now we've got access to these platforms that give us access to more jobs, and the job that I want to. Okay. There's another one that circle in the middle, ages of 45 to 55, is another stereotype. We tend to think that entrepreneurs of startups, etc., are young individuals. Everyone looks like Mark Zuckerberg 20 years ago. They do not. The most successful age category for entrepreneurs is between the ages of 45 and 55. The highest chance of being successful with your startup, the highest chance of raising the necessary funds, and the highest chance of achieving $1 billion valuation. Now, we all have to aspire to that, right? And that ages of 45 and 55 doesn't shift. So the various generations will shift through that age category, and the study's been repeated a couple of times. And why is it that entrepreneurs are more successful in that age bracket? That's perhaps when we're at peak technical experience and probably peak humility as well. I'm going to stop at here. I've run out of time. And just with a thought that we tend to worry that when we deploy technologies, we're going to, these technologies into our work environment, we're going to be okay. But what about the unemployed in South Africa? We've got a huge unemployment stat in the formal market. But what we're also seeing is that these technologies are enabling economic pillars that create employment. And the first pillar is that of distributed value chains, where you can bring micro-entrepreneurs to the end of a formal supply chain or value chain. And ultimately what these individuals are doing is not trading skills, they're trading time. And so just in the construct of distributed value chains, just the companies I've got up on the screen, 2 million jobs, almost 2 million jobs are created by these companies. If you have a moment, go look at Hey Jude, one of my favorite South African companies that provide digital concierge services, absolutely phenomenal. Around the world, in the G20 countries, this probably it will drive between 10 and 20% of employment over the next couple of years. In Africa, it's expected that about 80 million people will be employed on platform businesses over the next 6 years. Then you've got collaborative consumption platforms where, again, leveraging the technology, we're able to share assets. So entrepreneurs that can't afford the assets can now receive funding for the asset because they monetize the asset, and those that can get access to the asset use it like it's their own. And this is a growing sector, and the main beneficiaries of this economic pillar are women and the youth. And then the final one is using technology to create trust, transparency, and reliability. So using technology to make businesses or offerings or propositions that were once very physical and localized, very parochial, now distributable with trust to the business sector. So digitizing stock files, microfinancing of farmers, etc. All this is creating employment and predictive employment, which was not possible before the platforms. I'll leave it here.